Well, it's time now for another Golf Today roundtable as we welcome in two men we know for sure we'll see in 2026. GolfChannel.com senior writers Rex Hoggard and Ryan Lavner. Rex, I want to start with you. We've been talking a lot the last couple of days about Rory McIlroy playing in Dubai. That's his fifth start since the FedEx Cup season ended. Tommy Fleetwood has played 5. We just saw the victories that Scottie Scheffler and Xander Schauffele have had this year. That's their only performance that they've actually played, the only tournament they've entered since the FedEx Cup ended back in August. Do you think the top players have or will have an obligation to actually be seen more often in the fourth quarter of the year, either because the PGA Tour demands that they actually appear more often as part of a global schedule, or just simply as owners? They are equity stakeholders in the PGA Tour, that they have an obligation to kind of sell their own product in the fourth quarter.
I'm not proud to say this, but it probably depends on what passport they're carrying. Because if they're Americans, they have a tendency not to travel during the fall. It's just a fact. And look, the tour can certainly make it more compelling for players to compete in the fall. If we sort of fast forward to 2030 and beyond, you think about what the schedule could possibly look like. As Brian Roloff, the CEO of the PGA Tour, has talked about scarcity. If you turn the fall into some sort of international series that gave out a lot of big money, a lot of big world ranking points, made it significant, and it would include, obviously, a lot of the DP World Tour events, I can imagine some of the Americans getting off the couch in the fall and making the trips overseas. Until that happens, though, I think your Scottie Schefflers, your Xander Schauffele's, they're going to be perfectly happy taking this time off. And to be fair, it's a really busy season. They played a lot of golf this year. But you look at what the Europeans do. You look at what Rory did. As you pointed out, 5 times since the end of the playoffs. Tommy Fleetwood, all of these players have embraced the fall. And Rory's not even done. I'd love to see the Americans play more often, but they don't have it in their DNA, at least not right now.
Yeah, Lav, to that point, and the DP World Tour players are off the couch. They're not just playing, they are winning. When you look at the late summer into the fall, this love fest between Tommy Fleetwood and Justin Rose, Ryder Cup, Rory and Matt Fitzpatrick hugging on each other. Hey, let's make this a date in Dubai next year. How much have the last few months just been one DP World Tour Ryder Cup love fest?
Well, I think it is so because for good reason. Just as you mentioned, these are big marquee events on the DP World Tour, on the European Tour. These are some of the marquee events. They have great fields where, as we just pointed out, the American stars are largely sitting at home on their couch, recovering and recuperating. And so any sort of discussion about what should happen with the future of the fall, you have to understand there's so many different constituents at play. American players have made it clear, Scottie Scheffler among them, very content sitting at home for 3 months. Xander Schauffele only wants to play about once when he heads over to Japan, whereas the international players, the European players, love playing this time of year. And so does Brian Roloff want to go global? Does SSG not want to go global? You know, is that what's best for the fans? Is that not what's best for the fans? The PGA Tour executives have long made it clear they want to finish by the start of the NFL season and college football kicking off as well. And so, yes, the Americans are sitting at home, so it seems like they're not accomplishing anything. I think we'll probably have a different conversation once the springtime rolls around.
Ryan, is there a difference between what SSG or Brian Roloff or the broader tour organisation wants to do and what it needs to do? Because if you saw that emotion out of Rory McIlroy after his round on Sunday, where he's talking about Seve and he's talking about the history of the European Tour, and he's clearly invested in the future of that tour as well. If that tour is not part of a significant remaking of the future, particularly in terms of the end of the year or the start of the year, and if Liv does move in on that tour with more lucrative purses, then I think those guys are actually underestimating how many of the guys like a McIlroy or a Fleetwood or a Lowry or Fitzpatrick would start to play more often over there, which is a big hit for the PGA Tour product as well. Do they really need to focus on the fact that these guys are invested in the future of that tour and need to account for that somehow?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, you know, that's why I'm conflicted, because the fall on the PGA Tour, it still gives us some great stories. It still gives us some great moments. It gives us Adam Schenk sort of resurrecting his career. It gives us a Xander Schauffele who is redeeming what was a pretty disappointing season for him. It does crown a new star in Michael Brennan. But does it actually work right now, the PGA Tour product finishing before football starts and then having this sort of mediocre season for 2.5 months of players who could not quite cut it during the mainstream FedEx Cup season? The problem is a lot of it feels like wish casting at this point for a lot of us because we don't know what the future direction of the PGA Tour is. They're literally hammering that out right now with the Future Competitions Committee. Would you like to see the regular season on the PGA Tour strengthened by cutting out some of these sea-level events? Sure. Would you like to see the best stretches of the European Tour, which again are a strategic partner of the PGA Tour, be more incorporated into the PGA Tour product? For sure. Would you like to see the winnowing of the fall stretch to make it even more cutthroat, even more Hunger Games-like? Absolutely. I think all of those things are positive, but right now, as we sit here at the end of 2025, that's probably not going to be determined for the next 2 or 3 years. And that's why I think it's so ripe for opportunity to expand this. And if you're the PGA Tour, potentially sort of give the LIV circuit the Heisman and making sure they are bringing in some of the marquee events internationally on that stage.
Well, speaking of actually getting stiff-armed by LIV, Rex, last night it was reported that Henrik Stenson is heading back to the DP World Tour next year. He's been relegated out of LIV from poor performance. He's eligible to play in Europe again, having paid, I think it was £1 million in fines that were owed to that circuit. Do you see a scenario where Henrik could actually ever re-enter a conversation about being a Ryder Cup captain in the future, having walked away and had that stripped from him a few years ago?
I don't see how that happens because this goes back to some conversations I had just a few weeks ago at Bethpage, even before Luke Donald has won his second straight Ryder Cup as a captain, and the idea that it almost seems inevitable at this point that Luke Donald's going to get a third term at it. And if he doesn't, then he probably should. He's going to go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest European captain, if not all captains in the history of the Ryder Cup. So now you just start running out of real estate at some point. I don't think it has anything against Henrik Stenson. He's going to play his way back into the good graces of the DP World Tour. He certainly would probably have it on his mind, but whose place is he going to take? If Luke Donald does get another turn, now we're 4 years down the road, and you have to start having conversations about a Justin Rose being a captain, which you know he's going to do. Then we get into a Rory McIlroy and a Tommy Fleetwood. And as you get further and further along down the stretch, there just aren't any more spaces for him. So I think his opportunity is probably come and gone.
Last, speaking of the Ryder Cup, spoke to Jordan Spieth yesterday from the Crush It Cup in Dallas, benefiting the Jordan Spieth Family Foundation. He talked about hitting a lot of golf balls during the Ryder Cup, almost as self-flagellation for not being there. Said he's going to start his season at the Zone. He said he knows he has to get in contention more in the early part of the season to get to that Scotty Rory level ahead of the PGA Championship. Your thoughts on a player at 32 who always is wonderful with a microphone at his face?
Well, Rex is probably rolling his eyes because I was actually talking about Jordan Spieth for the Ryder Cup as late as July. If it was not for that withdrawal at the Travelers Championship, you could have potentially seen Jordan Spieth on that U.S. Ryder Cup team. But, Damon, you and I have been covering Jordan Spieth since basically 2010 when he was just a high school junior. I mean, he remains, even at this stage of his career, even though he is no longer the prolific winner and the major champion that he was in sort of his prime, just a huge draw for fans. He's so important for the PGA Tour to have these homegrown stars who are recognizable, who are familiar, who are popular. And I thought Jordan Spieth, at least in 2025, was a little bit better than I was anticipating, coming off what was a pretty serious issue that had plagued him for the past 2 or so years. He had a couple chances to win. You think back to Phoenix and Palm Beach, the Nelson Memorial as well. 4 top 10s, I thought, for a player who was coming back from that sort of injury was pretty encouraging statistically. There's certainly some areas to clean up with his wedge play and sort of his mid-range putting. But, I don't think the door is closed on having any sort of competitive relevance for Jordan Spieth. Is he right now a pretty clear tier break from the Justin Thomases and the Xander Schauffele's of the world? Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I don't think the gap, though, is unable for him to close, even at the age of 32, even after all the scar tissue that he's accumulated for the past 15 years.